would like to welcome you on behalf of TOBB-ETÜ Department of Political Science and International Relations. Today we are gathered here on the occasion of new Japan-Turkey Symposium. It's a great pleasure for us to host you here in such a remarkable event that brings together leading scholars from both sides. Before moving to opening speeches, we would like to express our sincere appreciation for the endless support of Japanese Embassy in Ankara. Their support and assistance has been vital for the realization of this event and of course the participation of you all. Dear guests, first let me invite Professor Haldun Yalçınkaya to introduce Symposium. Professor Yalçınkaya, please, you have the floor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and distinguished guests, and His Excellency Ambassador and Professors. On behalf of Economics and Technology University, Department of Political Science and International Relations, I appreciate your presence here, and also special thanks to professors from Japan. Although there were lots of problems all around the world, including the health issue, they kept their word just for sharing their knowledge with us in spite of this coronavirus symptom all around the world. Special thanks to them, and as well as on this issue, for our department, we care about Asia-Pacific relations and Turkish-Japan relations. We are aware of the ignorance of the Turkish academia to some extent in the eastern side of the world. So we care about enriching our curriculum with the rest of the world, specifically Asia-Pacific region, and hope our undergraduate and postgraduate students, not only from our department but also from other departments in Ankara, would be benefited from this symposium. This is our interest as an extracurricular activity. I'm cutting here. I just want to thank all of you. Thank you very much.
Professor Yalçınkaya, thank you for your speech. Next, I would like to invite Professor Asena Caner, the Dean of Faculty of Economic and Administrative Science, to welcome you on behalf of the TOBB University.
Good morning, everyone. Highly esteemed guests, dear ambassador, dear faculty, dear students. On behalf of the School of Economic and Administrative Sciences, I would like to welcome you to this symposium. I know that this is the second meeting this year under the project Dialogue between Turkey and Japan on Global Issues, organized by the Department of Political Science and International Relations at TOBB-ETÜ. These joint symposia aim to improve strategic cooperation between the two countries on global issues, and they have been generously supported by the Embassy of Japan since 2014. Each year, different topics are handled with the participation of experts from the two countries. In the 2019 and 2020 academic year, the selected topic is the impact of global transformations on the foreign policies of the two countries. In this context, we believe that the second symposium to be held today will have an important contribution to all students, academicians, researchers, and policymakers who are interested in these issues. So, once again, I would like to thank the Embassy of Japan on behalf of our university and our faculty for their support to the program, and I trust that the event will be a productive one. Thank you very much.
Professor Caner, thank you for your speech. Now I would like to invite His Excellency Mr. Akio Miyajima to deliver his speech.
Good morning, merhaba, günaydın. Professor Dr. Harvin Yalçınkaya, Chair of Department of Political Science and International Relations of TOBB University, and also Professor Dr. Asena Jana, the Dean of the Faculty, professors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Türkiye'de büyükelçi olarak göreve başlamamın üzerinden 2 sene 6 ay geçti. Bu süre içinde 40 şehri ziyaret ettim. Çok sayıda Türkiye'de tanışma, her yönlerin lezzetli yemeklerini tatma ve çeşitli önemli ait tarihi eserleri gören imkanı elde ettim. Her ziyaretim Türkiye'nin zengin kültür ve tarihi hakkında daha fazla bilgi sahibi olmama vesile oldu. Böyle bir ülkede büyükelçi olarak görev yapmak bana büyük bir mutluluk vermektedir. We have been holding diplomatic seminars every year in Turkey since 2014. The participation of intellectuals and experts who are active in the forefront have played an important role in the intellectual exchange between the two countries. In this year, in November 2019, last year, we have organized a seminar entitled Japan-Turkey Dialogue in Times of Global Transition that is focused on energy and the Middle East, here at the TOBB University. In this second seminar of current fiscal year, international affairs and energy should be discussed in November. That this time we hope that we can deepen your understanding of Japan's foreign policy and issues, including the security environment surrounding Japan and some energy security issues as well. For the purpose of providing you a background, I would like to introduce the main policy areas of the Japanese diplomacy, based on the foreign policy speech by Foreign Minister Motegi at the opening session of the National Diet of Japan on January 20th. In recent years, security of environment surrounding Japan has become even more severe, while the balance of power in the international community is changing in an increasingly rapid and complex manner. Japan needs to make greater contribution to the peace and stability of the region and international community by enhancing the international order based on the rule of law from the perspective of proactive contribution to peace. For this reason, Japan will pursue with diplomacy with a sense of caring and robustness, with a particular focus on the following 6 policy areas. First area is the Japan-US alliance. This is a cornerstone of Japan's foreign policy and security. Also, this year marks the 60th anniversary of the signing of an entry into force of the Japan-US Security Treaty. Within the context of free and open Indo-Pacific vision, we will further strengthen Japan-US alliance, which plays a major role in contributing to regional peace and stability. Second policy is the concern regarding North Korea. Provocative actions by North Korea, such as repeated ballistic missile launches, are completely unacceptable. Japan continues to seek to normalize its relations with North Korea through comprehensively resolving prominent issues of concern such as abductions, nuclear and missile issues in accordance with Japan-North Korea Pyongyang Declaration. Third, Japan will actively make efforts to diplomacy with its neighboring countries such as China, Korea, and Russia. In particular, today, Japan and China share significant responsibilities indispensable to the peace and prosperity of Asia and the world. The fourth is intensifying approach to the Middle East. The peace and stability in the Middle East is essential for the peace and prosperity of the international community, including Japan. As Japan depends on the Middle East for around 90% of its crude oil imports, it is extremely important to ensure the safety of navigation in the waters in the Middle East region. At the end of last year, Japan decided to dispatch the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Forces to strengthen its information gathering posture. We will continue further efforts towards peace and stability in the Middle East. Fifth, we will further advance economic diplomacy. Japan has vigorously pursued economic partnership agreements, including the TPP-11, Japan-EU EPA, and Japan-US trade agreement as well. The 17th round of negotiations for Japan-Turkey Economic Partnership Agreement was held in October last year, and the negotiations are in the final stage with the aim of achieving an early agreement. Sixth and the last that is about how Japan addresses global issues. Actions must be taken in wide-ranging areas including education, health, human rights, refugees and displaced persons, women, disaster risk reduction, climate change, and marine plastic litter. So that the coronavirus, how to tackle the coronavirus is one of these issues. In light of outcome of what we call TICAD 7, the 7th Tokyo International Conference on African Development last year, Japan strongly supports African development efforts. Furthermore, concerning the United Nations, which marks the 75th anniversary this year, Japan intends to move forward with the UN Security Council reforms, including Japan's entry as a permanent member. These are 6 primary areas of Japan's diplomacy. So that I hope that you can listen to today's two Japanese participants, what they were talking, with those kind of things in their mind. Japonya ve Türkiye tarihi olarak iki dost ülke ve stratejik ortaktır. 2024 yılında Japonya-Türkiye diplomatik ilişkilerinin başlangıcının 100. yıl dönümünü kutlayacağız. Bu sene 1890 tarihinde meydana gelen ve Japonya-Türkiye dostluğunun temel taşı olan Ertuğrul Fırkateyni kazansının 130. yıl dönümüydü. So this year, 2024 is the 100th anniversary of our diplomatic relations. This year marks the 130th anniversary of the Ertuğrul incident. We hope that we can promote friendship and partnership further. The Olympic and Paralympic Games will be held in Tokyo this summer. The preparations are in good progress. Their motto is united by emotion. Today, as Ambassador of Japan in Turkey, I would like to express my sincere wish for the success of both Japanese and Turkish athletes. I hope today's intellectual dialogue will be a wonderful opportunity to further strengthen friendship and partnership between two countries, strengthen the bond between two countries in all aspects, including politics, economy, and culture. I believe Türkiye ve Japonya coğrafi olarak birbirinden uzaktır, fakat kalplerimiz yakındır. Let me finish by remark with my heartfelt wish a lasting peace in this region, including Italy, and a quick end to the coronavirus outbreak. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you for your speech. Now we move to keynote speeches. The first keynote address will be delivered by Professor Hiroshi Nakanishi from the Kyoto University. His speech is entitled Transformation of the Global Order and Japanese Foreign Policy. Professor Nakanishi, the floor is yours.
Okay, I take it here. I don't use PowerPoint, so. Thank you, Ms. Speaker, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Hiroshi Nakanishi. I teach international relations at Kyoto University, which is the western part of Japan, which is relatively so far immune from the coronavirus outbreak. But as some speakers have already mentioned, it is a pretty much tense time in East Asia, and I hear that the things are getting tense in this part of the world as to the situation in Middle East. But I think that will give more incentive for us to have a dialogue. Well, it is a great honor for me to have an opportunity to participate and deliver a speech at this round of Japan-Turkey Dialogue Symposium. This is my second trip to this country, the Republic of Turkey, and my very first chance to visit this city of Ankara. So many thanks to the host, TOBB University, Dr. Şaban Kardaş in particular, for arranging everything about my visit as well as this symposium, and the members of the Embassy of Japan in Turkey, with special thanks to His Excellency Ambassador Miyajima Akio, who first called me up for this opportunity. Well, I'd like to talk about first about my observation about the international situations right now, and then I will talk about the general feature of the Japanese foreign policy within 30 minutes. So it's a relatively short speech, so I will not be able to cover detailed features, but I hope my talk will give some background for us to later discuss about the issues of common concern of the two countries. Now, there is no need to state that international order right now is in a tumultuous situation. Of course, American President Trump is a big factor, but he is not the root cause of the problem. However significant what he does and says about the American foreign policy, Mr. Trump is the symptom and consequence of the current state of global society. What we face today is much longer than just last 4 years, and much deeper than just a handful of political leaders' characters. The biggest problem I would like to point to is the failure to identify what happened in the last decade of the previous century, which was the 1990s, after the end of the Cold War. And the mistake of the perception still prevents us to see what is happening right now clearly, and then what we should do about the situation. The dominant language in the last decade of the last century was the global end of the Cold War. Of course, the Cold War ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. But the discourse of the quote-unquote end of the Cold War was talked too loudly, as if it was the only thing which mattered, and allowing the collateral perception that the West, led by the United States, won the Cold War against the Soviet Union and the communist ideology. I think there are at least two aspects which must have been recognized along with the discourse of the end of the Cold War. The first was the technological transformation from the late 20th century which continues and being amplified today. That is the transformation from industrial civilization to post-industrial and particularly information civilization. The Russian and East European communism could handle the industrial technology in the middle of the 20th century, but they could not catch up with the rise of the information technology, IT technology, from 1960s to 70s. This gap, rather than the political philosophy of liberal democracy or economic philosophy of the market liberalism, lured the people, populace under communist rule to discard their regimes. The Western camp mistook this logic as their ideological, political, and economic ideological victory over the East. But in that sense, the victory was partial and modest. The second aspect, which I think needed to be addressed, was the quote-unquote the rise of the rest, as American commentator Farid Zakaria observed about a decade ago. Looking back at the international history, I think it actually had already started before the end of the Cold War. If we single out one particular year as the turning point of history, it may have been 1978 or 79, when Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping started the reform and opening policy from late 1978, and when Iran's Islamic Revolution took place in the spring of 1979. Looking back, it was when the incidents, not necessarily related to the issue of the Cold War, started to change the course of world history. In fact, we have to remember again that Chinese communism survived the 1989 Tiananmen incident by combining market opening and strong-hand authoritarian rule. Iranian theocratic regime also survived the war against the Saddam Hussein's Iraq in 1980s. Currently, what is happening in international relations is the revolution of information technology and the continued rise of the rest have combined and causing the transformation of the global order. I would like to point to three categories of change. First is the change in the balance of power among the great powers. China is now the second largest economy in the world and military powerhouse. And Russia also recovered from the Soviet collapse to become a highly skilled country for information warfare. The predominance of the West, once thought invincible, lost ground to the rising non-West in the decade of 2000 by the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, as well as the financial crisis after the Lehman shock. Now, the Trump administration has officially been eyeing on China and Russia as emerging global threat, as well as Iraq and North Korea as regional threats. But the American allies support distance only as a general principle, while the European and Asian powers have different nuances and stances to this format by the Trump administration. One reason for the diversity within the Western alliance is the changing domestic political processes caused by the information technology. The social networking services, SNS, and smartphones, which is surprisingly new to our civilization, which came to be widely used in late 2000s, have changed the political process across the globe and across the political regimes, and generally promoted radical populism. Typical examples were the so-called Arab Spring in 2011, starting from Tunisia, then spread to Egypt, Libya, Syria, and other countries. Minor revolution in Ukraine in 2014 may be another example. But the more lingering and the structural change is happening because of the rise of the populism, which tend to seek anti-globalization stance. The overt anti-internationalism of the current Trump administration of the United States, or the Brexit movement of the UK government are typical examples. The widening income gap across the borders added fuel to this anti-global populism, weakening the possible international organizations and Western-centered alliances. That is the second aspect I'd like to point out. Then third is the increasing global risks associated with the global industrialization, harmonization, and spread of technology. This amounts to extremely diverse types of threats and challenges, ranging from terrorism, cyber threats, refugees, extreme poverty, severe natural disasters, new infectious diseases such as this coronavirus outbreak, and so on. They are diverse, but the common feature of this type of challenges is that they are transnational and quite unpredictable. The only effective way of response is global cooperation among mankind. But given the situation where the global elites stay on the side of hubs and putting much of the burden of the adjustment on the shoulders of the have-nots, while the have-nots are increasingly resentful and lured to the idea of anti-globalization, framework for international cooperation is getting thinner and thinner. Now, let me discuss how Japan is facing up to these challenges. In a nutshell, Japan has been trying to cope with these challenges by building on its post-war foreign policy and strengthening and revising it, intending to reform and strengthen the international cooperation. Post-war Japanese policy had several characteristics. First, emphasis on economic cooperation and peaceful diplomacy without resort to military means for the foreign policy purposes. Second, alignment with the United States-led Western liberal society. Third, avoidance of the West versus non-West dichotomy. These foreign policy characteristics worked reasonably well before the end of the Cold War and until the so-called the Gulf War shock of 1991 disclosed the weakness of the so-called checkbook diplomacy of Japan. After that shock, Japan has intended to expand its post-war foreign policy. Since then, with a reasonable amount of struggles, Japan politically, economically, diplomatically tried to increase its international presence. And in the last decade or so, Japan is finding a new set of policies. First is the wider use of Japanese resources, including defense capabilities, for the international cooperation. Japanese self-defense force started to participate in the UN peacekeeping operations in the middle of the 1990s, and other policing actions against terrorism or piracy, and helped organize the international disaster response activities. We are looking at one significant consequence of this policy change with the dispatch of Japanese destroyer Takanami along with the P-3C planes near but not inside of the Persian Gulf area for intelligence gathering and to help protect Japan-related tanker and other ships. 30 years ago, Japanese concern about the Middle East was first and foremost oil. Now, Japanese footprints here are much bigger and wider. Second is the enlargement of the global and regional cooperation. Japan initiated the Asia-Pacific Cooperation from 1960s through the post-Cold War era, which helped create the area of free trade and economic development cooperation in the Asia-Pacific region, such as the American continent, China and other East Asian countries, Southeast Asia, and oceanic countries of Australia and New Zealand. In the post-Cold War era, Japan has widened the focus towards the pan-Indian Ocean area, which culminated into the current free and open Indo-Pacific strategy or Indo-Pacific vision, about which Mr. Kato may talk a little further in his speech. At the same time, Japan has pursued the deepening of the free trade area by promoting the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, so-called TPP. Regrettably, the Trump administration withdrew from this scheme, but Japan held on and realized the so-called TPP-11, officially comprehensive and progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership. Now Japan is trying to expand this TPP scheme by accepting more members, including the post-Brexit UK, which may have subsidiary impact on the Indo-Pacific scheme also. On the global front, Japan hosted the G20 meeting at Osaka last summer. There, Japan promoted the idea of the quote-unquote data free flow with trust, DFFT, the data free flow with trust, trying to combine the digital innovation with human rights protection and human rights enhancement. At the same time, Japan put high priority on the UN SDG goals as the global issues Japan and other countries, particularly the G20 countries, need to cooperate to achieve. These Japanese policies are not just for liberal or idealistic purposes, but have its realistic and geostrategic side. Post-Cold War Japan has increasingly faced the rise of China and the changing of the balance of power between the US and China. Japan shares much of the values and interests with the United States as an only military ally, while Japan has territorial disputes and other geopolitical contradictions with China. But China is a long-standing cultural partner for Japan, as well as the now most important economic partner. So what Japan wants to avoid most is to put itself into the situation where two giants, US and China, fight against each other, sacrificing Japan and other countries in the middle. So Japan has strengthened its security alliance with the United States basically, in order to secure the American deterrence capability and commitment in the region, in order to counter the North Korean military threat as well as the Chinese military expansion. Japan has widened its definition of defense in order to cover alliance-related operations. With the current American president, Japan has also increased its arms purchases for the sake of securing relationship with the United States. At the same time, rather than containing China from its natural development, Japan has attempted to draw China into the existing international norms and schemes. Free and open Indo-Pacific vision, as well as the TPP scheme, are some of the tools for this purpose. Needless to say, China is a big presence. Xi Jinping regime appears to getting closer to the more traditional type of Chinese imperial despotism rather than the modern communist regime. Combining the cutting-edge technology with traditional authoritarian regime, the Chinese regime seems up and running. But what is happening to the Islamic population in Xinjiang and other places is beyond the humanitarian concerns and human rights suppression in general in China may be an inherently weak side of China as a modern society. So I will not share sometimes harsh language of Japan being or becoming the world leader on par with the United States or China. Japan has its own serious problem of decreasing and aging populations, accumulation of national and other debts, weakening industrial bases. But Japan has taken pains to make use of its limited resources as much as possible in order to enhance the international cooperation in a realistic way. Not in the least, cooperation with countries like Turkey is the key of Japan's foreign policy, and I hope my talk and today's symposium will enhance that cooperation. Thank you for your attention.
Dear Professor, thank you for your presentation. The second keynote address will be delivered by Professor Fuat Keyman from the Istanbul Policy Center and Sabancı University. His speech is entitled Turkey's Foreign Policy Choices at the Nexus of Global Regional Turmoil.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much, Professor, for a very enlightening speech. I am also honored to be here, and I thank Şaban, for inviting me here. What I would like to do in this short introductory speech is to share with you my take on Turkish foreign policy in a global and regional turmoil. And I like to do it in 3 stages. One, I will talk about how I approach the assessment of a country's foreign policy. And then I will focus on Turkey. But from my PhD years, I've been reading on Japan. Japan is one of the cases for me always. So I like to finish with my thinking about the importance of Turkey-Japan relations within the broader context of globalization and global governance. Of course, there are very significant experts on foreign policy here. I am not a foreign policy expert, but when I talk about Turkish foreign policy or Turkey's specific issues regionally and globally, I start with two axiological statements. One of them actually is very simple, which actually we learn from foreign policy courses in universities. You know, when you teach a foreign policy, usually it starts with this triangular relationship. In assessing success or failure of a country's foreign policy, we have to look at first environment, or either global, broader global context, whether or not certain foreign policy decisions are compatible with the contextual, environmental, issues and factors. Second, capacity from soft power, hard power, and smart power. How much capacity a country has to actually implement its foreign policy in a successful way, and also capacity constitutes a benchmark for assessing a failure of some countries' foreign policy choices. And finally, strategy, and sometimes certain foreign policy choices could be compatible and based on certain capacity, but actors take wrong strategies or implement wrong strategies. So in this sense, with a very simple, but for me, enlightening starting point, we always keep in these three benchmarks in mind: environment, capacity, and strategy. Second is actually, my generation, sort of a historical sociology, left sociology, Marxist political economy, a famous Marx axiological statement, which become actually a general statement in IR, in sociology, in economy and political economy. That is, actors make history, but not under the conditions they choose, from which we have a very rich discussion about structure and agency. Because, actors always, leaders always matter in making history, but sometimes, they face conditions in which they take decisions, but conditions either enable or limit their choices. So in this sense, on the one hand, environment, capacity and strategy, three benchmarks in assessment, but at the same time, we always keep in mind that, of course, leaders matter, but leaders' decisions are always made in a certain circumstances which they don't subscribe to or they don't choose. So in that, well, let me start with a broader global context, an environment. What kind of environment we have actually in, and what one could extrapolate from this environment. Of course, from 2001 onwards, we've been living in a global regional turmoil. 2001, 9/11 has actually changed the world radically in terms of security relations, the way we look at the terrorist activities, the relationship between states and sub-state actors, and so on and so forth. Of course, the second one was 2008 economic crisis, which is still continuing, and there's no decoupling in it, and we have actually very severe economic crisis in the world. 2010 Arab Spring was kind of a moment where our hopes for future increased. Our hopes for transformation from within. People are making history. Our people in MENA region are making their own history. First time post-colonial kind of And of course, we know that what we called Arab Spring, our hopes died, and we have a very significant regional turmoil, Syria, Iraq, but of course goes to Libya, Yemen, Somalia, so forth. So in this environment, what is important to take from these processes is the question of the West, the question of hegemony. In this context, I would like you to bring to your attention what is called Munich Security Conference, which is done every year since 1963. And this last year Munich Security Conference, 2019 conference, of course the very high-level conference, the leaders, foreign policymakers, economic and international organization representatives attend. And it was little jargonist, but this 2019 Munich Security Conference main ANA theme is kind of interesting. It is difficult to pronounce in actually English. It is called Westlessness. Batının ortadan kalkması gibi bir şey. Westlessness. And it was actually, I work with Germans, I have German friends. I can understand that Germans come up with this kind of terminology for a very security-oriented. And they consciously, chose this term, Westlessness. And what happens, we talk about foreign policy in an environment where we are facing this development, that what we actually think about the world is no longer, available or around us. And when they describe the Westlessness, they say that this has to do with the fear that the West is now so divided on the one hand, and challenged by the bunch of actors, beginning with rise of China, but also in a multipolar world, bunch of other actors, that its whole existence has become imperiled. So in this sense, not only we are talking about the decline of the West, we are talking about that decline as a problem for the world, and this needs to be taken into account. Of course, this Westlessness issue was challenged by the head of IMF, head of EU, and everything. But the German foreign minister, Heiko Maas, the German foreign minister, suggests that, for instance, in terms of the future Middle East, the regional turmoil, he said that the future of Middle East, the future of Syria, is not being determined in Geneva or New York, that are the residents of the UN, but in Astana, in Sochi, the cities where Russia, Iran, and Turkey meet. So in this sense, very significant regional turmoil issues, even the places that we look at is no longer Washington, is no longer New York, is no longer Geneva, but we look at this so far unknown places like Astana, like Sochi. But of course, thanks to Istanbul, we have also summit in Istanbul that is actually global speed. But we didn't have actually Tahran, or we didn't have Moscow. We have usually Sochi agreement or Astana. And also, as the first speaker said, that this Westlessness issue has become more complicated when Trump administration, the existing hegemon, decided to pull its troops from the Middle East, from Syria, mainly. According to Mr. Maas, the German foreign affairs minister, I like this term, which is better than restlessness. This has created geostrategic gaps now being filled by countries like Russia, Iran, and Turkey. So in this sense, Restlessness also implies the declining leverage and effectivity of the global hegemony to solve the problems for us. So in this sense, my first point actually is, when we talk about foreign policy assessment and Turkish foreign policy, the first maybe, reference is the environment in which we are talking about the, growing concern about restlessness. But of course, I like to actually make this a bit more, substantiated. What is it that we are talking about? Of course, according to Henry Kissinger, we are talking about the fact that maybe post-1945 liberal order has come to an end. So in this sense, we are not talking about specific leaders, specific problems, but the larger issue of the fact that our general environment, broader context, institutionally, discursively, and strategically has been coming to the end. Of course, with which comes what we call the decline of multilateralism, because restlessness is based on a multilateral view of the world, multilateral arrangements, which we call in universities international organizations, like the United Nations, like IMF, World Bank, NATO, so on, European Union, so on and so forth. So we have a decline of multilateralism. We have a rise as a result of multipolar world. So it is no longer the only American hegemony that actually neocons, for instance, after 9/11 declared. It's an American century. It is no longer an American century. It is no longer a unipolar world. As a result, as a matter of fact, maybe one wishes that it should be an American or unipolar world. It is actually decline of multilateralism going hand in hand with the rise of multipolar world. But of course, multipolar world is actually shaped by, in terms of restlessness, shaped by the increase in shaping of politics. First, the role of leaders. We are maybe actually thinking about foreign policy in the age of leadership. Leaders matter more than countries. Leaders matter more than political parties. For instance, America, we refer to Trump. Russia, we refer to Putin. Turkey, we refer to Erdogan. These leaders are stronger and more effective than even their own political parties. Macron is not actually sort of a semi-presidential system, a representative of certain parties. It is a leader in itself. And these leaders, when actually go through their speeches in an academic way, you could actually see three kind of common denominators among them. First, they don't like checks and balances. They don't like actually the existing rule of law, existing parliamentary structures or governmental structures. And they say that we are living in a restlessness world with extremely significant security challenges, economic challenges, and also human condition-based challenges from refugees to climate change, so that we have to have fast decision making. We have to respond them effectively, and effective responses sometimes requires getting out of these checks and balances and like that. From all of them actually, they prefer kind of a fast decision making, delivery, rather than the language of rights and freedoms and rule of law. Secondly, in terms of Denis Roderick's trilemma, security, economy, and democracy, they prefer security and economy over democracy. They say that we have a very significant security challenges, economic challenges. So in this sense, our prioritization should start with security and economy over democracy. And thirdly, they actually create norms that are illiberal or does not feed the Western world's West world's norms, like human rights, like proceduralism, appropriateness, so on and so forth. Their norms are much more territorial integrity, stability, order, so forth. From America comes first, making America greater, protecting countries, so on and so forth. We see that actually they have norms that do not fit in the post-war liberal order. Of course, when this happens, the decline of multilateralism, the rise of leadership, which we sometimes call it populism, competitive authoritarianism, so on and so forth, mushrooming everywhere in the world, coupled with geostrategic gaps created by the decline of the leverage of the United States, then we have a question. How are we going to actually deal with regional and global turmoil? How are we going to actually deal with this destabilizing kind of factors? In Munich conference and in other conference, and also in actually looking at recent Turkish foreign policy, but also Russia and Iran, I see that the strategic choice in this context has been recently to go back to the politics of alliances rather than multilateralism, rather than institutional arrangements. A generation before me, my teachers in Turkish foreign policy during the 60s and 70s were based on alliances. Alliances with Europe, alliances with NATO, so on and so forth. But those alliances are based on institutional arrangements, and Turkey tried to secure itself in a buffer situation between Soviet Union and American bipolar system by locating itself in alliances. And look at the Turkish foreign policy 60s and 70s, they keep talking about alliances. But today's alliance, today's return to alliance is different from the previous one. These are more flexible. These are more choice-based. And these are actually, done by the choice of the leaders. I call them flexible alliances, in which more than two actors get together to deal with certain security and economic challenges without dealing with checks and balances, without dealing with institutional arrangements, without dealing with what we call democracy and proceduralism, so on and so forth. As a matter of fact, if I go back to Heiko Maas, German Foreign Affairs Minister's first the sentences, that is, the future of the Middle East is not being determined in Geneva, New York, residencies of the UN, but instead in Astana and Sochi, the cities where Russia, Iran, and Turkey meet. Actually, when I put them in academic jargon, what he's talking about is the beginning of the new era in which flexible alliances are chosen by leaders rather than institutional arrangements. Actually, Astana and Sochi, within the context of Syria problem for Turkey, is a very good example of how flexible alliances work. If you look at the beginning of the Astana process and Sochi today, last couple of years, and also Turkey, Iraq, Iran flexible alliance to resist the Kurdish referendum in Iran. And also Mr. Erdogan's call for inviting Germany and France to Istanbul to deal with Syria underlined that Germany and France are not coming to Istanbul as core members of the EU. Rather, they are coming to Istanbul, they are talking to Turkey as independent nation states dealing with the question of Syria, dealing with security. So we are talking about not EU, Turkey and Russia, we are talking about Germany, France, Turkey, and then Russia. When I study this, by going beyond what they do and what they say, I actually come up with 5 characteristics of these flexible alliances. The first of all, in Russia, I will come today actually at the end, in Russia-Turkey-Iran relationship, and if you look at Russia-Turkey relations, Russia and Turkey do not trust each other. There is no trust relationship between them. Russia's strategy on Syria, Turkey's strategy on Syria, rather than converge, very radically diverge. Turkey cannot accept Russia's take on Syria, Russia's vision of it. So there is no trust between them. There is no strategical convergence between them. Moreover, there is actually no tactical convergence as we see it in Idlib between them. But then we ask the question, why then they are coming together? On what ground they are coming together? That actually brings us the question of capacity. They actually come together to increase their capacity and leverage on certain issues. So capacity building or leveraging is the key for these kind of alliances. That is actually different from 1960s and 70s. Secondly, when we look at these alliances, they are nation-state based rather than institutional. So in this sense, we are talking about, as the members of this, they are nation-states. So Turkey is there, not a member of or a country going through accession with the EU, not a member of NATO, but independent nation-state. That's the choice by the Turkish government recently. Thirdly, they actually prioritize security and economy/energy over democracy and checks and balances. And then fourthly, sometimes our European friends made a mistake this way. They think that they are without norms, but they have norms. And those norms actually are state security, stability, order, and so on and so forth. But I maybe finished my time, so let me actually make 2 points lastly. But as Idlib shows that, flexible alliances are also fragile. And fragile alliances, they can actually end as soon as one of the parties think that they could leverage that itself from a different way. This is what is actually happening in Idlib right now between Turkey and Russia. This untrust-based, this strategically diverging alliance may be coming to the end because Russia thinks that it might actually continue its leverage in Syria without Turkey or by making other kind of flexible alliances. Maybe Saudi Arabia, maybe Emirates, so on and so forth. So in this sense, we have to actually accept that flexible alliances are fragile. Second, flexible alliances could be very costly. Like for instance, Turkey's position in NATO, Turkey's position between America and Russia, and Turkey's position with the EU. Russia wins more than Turkey. Turkey's accession process gets reduced to partnership rather than membership in the EU. And United States uses Turkey not to care about Turkey and Turkish people, but to actually fight against or to leverage itself vis-a-vis Russia. So in this sense, for instance, flexible alliances, which appear to be okay for Turkey, turn out to be very fragile and very costly for Turkey. And we have to actually accept this. But what should Turkey do if alliances are there? If you give me 2 minutes, I will actually, I have to, say something about Turkey-Japan relations. I go back to the early years of the Turkish Republic, the time of Atatürk, because Atatürk at that time used flexible alliances in a very clever way. In a way, Turkey was fighting its independence war vis-à-vis Western imperial powers. Turkey actually was fighting but envisioning itself in a modern nation state, maybe whose strategic choice was in the West. But at the same time, in a famous letter to Lenin, Turkey also acted very cleverly, in a flexible way, by creating alliance with Russia, with actually Lenin, but also became very positively perceived in the world as one of the first anti-colonial struggles in the world. By India, by Pakistan, by Japan, so on and so forth. So in this sense, if we are going for flexible alliances, to get rid of the fragility and the cost factor, you have to create a balance between your strategic choice and your flexible alliances, which we lack in Turkey right now, and which is the main reason why we are facing very significant problems in Idlib and the other world. If you do that today, going back to Westlessness, I think Turkey and Japan might be actually an important case. My PhD years onward, I was writing my PhD and I wrote a piece which I got A plus, I think exactly to say it. And I was comparing Meiji Japan and Atatürk Turkey, because at those years, 2 significant books came out. Theodor Skachbos' book on State and Revolutions, Alan Trimberger book on Revolution from Above, Japan, Turkey, Egypt and Peru. Military bureaucrats and social change. We have actually one couple of generations before, Doğan Avcıoğlu's famous books on Türkiye'nin düzeni, rejim ve devri, big comparisons between Turkey and Japan. And recently I got involved in a project, multiple modernities in non-Western world, Japan, Turkey, China, Korea, so on and so forth. I think if we are living in a Westlessness world, and if we are actually searching for stability and order, we have to do 2 things. First, we have to actually go for flexible alliances, but by coupling them, by articulating them with larger strategic choices, a true reading of globalization, creating different understanding of globalization in which Japan, Turkey could play extremely important role. And more importantly, by establishing a relationship between, or balance between, security, economy, and democracy. When we actually go away from democracy, when we actually go away from checks and balances, when we go away from law and the other issues, when we locate ourselves only in security and energy, I think the cost factor and the risk factor for countries like Turkey is much higher than Turkey with Japan, Turkey with Korea, Turkey with other so-called non-Western powers whose articulation of globalization has been very successful so far by combining all of these factors. So in this sense, I will make a plea in conclusion that we should actually think about Turkey-Japan relations, not only in terms of 2 countries' bilateral relations, but these 2 countries' historical and today's vision of globalization, global governance, and how to contribute not as specific orders, but global governance and global stability. Thank you very much.
Professor Keyman, thank you for your speech. Yes. May I also invite you for Q&A session?
Thank you for coming to our university. My first question is to Mr. Professor Keyman. I believe the term you are using, restlessness, actually not quite right in my humble opinion, because what you describe as restlessness is not the lack of West, it's the lack of neoliberal order actually. And what West is actually predates the ideas of modernity, like liberalism. So in our side, it's restlessness, but in the side of the populist movements, it's actually not the fall of the West, it's the rise of the West actually, because they believe that these globalists and liberal ideas are actually suppressing the Western ideas, which could be found in the Iliad, for example, or the Eddas of the Scandinavia. So, in this context, as the liberal order is sustained by the economical advancement, but the traditions of old civilizations actually sustained by the soul, the way of living of the people. We could say that in an economic transition eras, the economical ideas will go down, but the continuity of the civilizations, the traditions will move on. So in this context, don't you think that it's a bit shallow to say that rise of the populism and far right is just the concern of the revival of the fascism, because the fascism itself is the revival, is born from modernity actually. So in this context, I would like to ask you, in the times of transitions, is it sensible for Turkey and is it sensible for Japan actually to try to hold on to the neoliberal values instead of looking something too deeper? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the presentations. My name is Momoko Kigera. I'm from a Japanese newspaper called Nikkei, and I have a question for Professor Keyman too. So I understand that you were suggesting that the Idlib issue may become a turning point of Turkey-Russia flexible alliance, but what if the two leaders reach certain agreements on like March 5th? Do you still think it will be the flexible alliances of the two countries may be ending regardless of the short outcome of the Idlib issue? Thank you.
Thank you both for the very informative speeches. I would like to ask, especially to Mr. Nakanishi, how would you evaluate media restriction and especially internet restriction in authoritarian regimes as a force against globalization?
Thank you very much. A quick question, probably a clarification to the speech by Professor Nakanishi. How is the response of Japan towards the deterioration of relations between China and the United States? It was not clear in your speech. How was Japan's response?
I have two questions, but excellent and questions requiring a longer discussion. Thank you very much for your points about restlessness. I actually use this in a strategic way to link it to this idea of alliances and how to deal with Sochi, Astana beyond its sort of form. Whether or not it is creating a new trend in international relations, foreign policy making. I think we should actually take seriously these alliances or return to alliances based on leaders. It might create a sort of a trend. That's why I use it. And there is a point about the term Westlessness in terms of what it involves: the decline of the West, decline of transatlantic pact, Europe, United States relations, all things, rise of populism, so on and so forth. But you are absolutely right. Like for instance, I recommend people, everybody watches Netflix and like this is right now. There is actually Babylon Berlin. I don't know how many of you know, but it has to do with the 1920s Berlin. Yes, fascism comes from within modernity. And as a matter of fact, Zygmunt Bauman, one of my heroes, says that fascism created a big genocide, not because Jewish people were outside the German identity, they wanted to integrate. So it is actually modernity. It is things, and very famous book by him actually on that one. And it is, foreign policy way we could actually think it this way: restlessness and flexible alliances. But it's a larger question of Western globalization. That's why I use security, the economy, and democracy. I agree with you that on the one hand we have this rise of extreme right leaders, decline of the leverages, but also one should pay attention to the cases of Sweden, Norway, Finland in terms of education, in terms of sort of quality globalization, in terms of globalization and equality, kind of egalitarianism kind of thing. There is no West, one West. There are many Westers. But on the other hand, as your last point, one should also pay attention, not only westward, but globalization. Hong Kong, for instance, right now, Tahrir before, Gezi, and all of the others, Maidan in Ukraine. We have actually maybe coming to not only the end of the post-war order, but the neoliberal globalization, in which representative democracy and political parties declining all over the world. Leaders getting stronger all over the world. So there is a sort of narrowing down of democracy at the level of the politics, but there is bottom-up movements everywhere, challenging neoliberalism, going for equality and stuff like that. So I think there are two ways of looking at it, and I appreciate that one. Flexible alliances in Idlib, I think for me might be a turning point, and I don't like the Turkish foreign policy in the last 2-3 years. I don't really actually like the idea of flexible alliances. It actually describes the situation. It's not my preference. My preference actually is rules-based multilateral arrangements coupled with flexible alliances. Big debate in Turkey. But on the other hand, as let me put it this way, we had a Russia meeting in Istanbul Police Center last week, and as one of the Russia experts from Moscow said that Putin and Erdogan do not trust each other. Russia and Turkey historically and today have not been in trust relationship, and their strategies, more importantly, diverge radically, because Putin forces Erdogan to talk to Assad by even helping Assad to kill Turkish soldiers then. And it takes guts in Turkey for a leader to talk to Assad right now after all these martyrs. So we have to go beyond these things, and I think right now Turkey and Mr. Erdogan will actually move little. It's the other side of flexible alliances. Trump, Germany, Merkel, and Macron, and now is Johnson in Britain, and try to create flexible alliance kind of thing with the Western kind of order. And I think the move for, which I don't subscribe either, to use the refugees this way, to actually get the Western powers in the situation, enlarge the Idlib situation, is actually an indicator, as much as our martyrs in Idlib. This two movements, and then his actual speeches indicate that Turkey might be moving towards sort of a Western, but still not institutional arrangements, but nation-state-based alliances with key European capitals to actually help Turkey increase its leverage on the series.
Thank you for the questions. I think I got basically two questions. One is about the internet restrictions, and the second is the Japanese response to China-US relationship, particularly the rising tension between two countries. On the first point, I think this related to the first question as to the whether it's a decline of the West or the decline of the neoliberal order. And I think internet restriction, there are kind of varieties of how we consider the restrictions of internet. Obviously, the way China and other authoritarian regimes do about the internet is something which is not acceptable in terms of the freedom of expression, particularly in the sense of allowing the political dissension expressed through the media. But when the new technologies of communication rises, there is a tendency of those new technological communication go too much and become harmful to the trustful means of communication. So what's happening right now about internet, particularly they talk about the quote unquote fake news or the hybrid warfare and that kind of things, really complicates the formal process of democracy within the democratic countries. So I think there must be a reasonable amount of restrictions or the legal or other frameworks to sort of set some rules of expressing views within the internet. And I think that's the things are moving to that direction gradually, but I think we have to sort out how we can differentiate the authoritarian type of restriction towards the more liberal, the human rights oriented restriction on internet and other new means of communication. The secondly, on Japan's response to China and US, I think it's a kind of multi-layered one. Particularly before this Trump administration, Japan tried to persuade the United States about the difficulty of changing the Chinese politics for the to the direction of the more freedom, more Western-oriented nature, and so the shift of the American stance towards China in terms of the policy of engagement is somewhat welcomed by Japanese foreign policy elite. But Japan is also worried about the United States moving from one extreme to another extreme. So first, Japan is now taking advantage of the worsening of the U.S.-China relationship so that Japan can have a better position both with the United States and both with China. And Japan is trying to welcome Mr. Xi Jinping in April, which will probably be postponed because of this corona issue. But anyway, Japan is now trying to have an improved relationship with China. But at the same time, Japan is trying to sort of manage, control the US-China tension, which will not go away in a reasonable amount, reasonable extent, so that the whole system of the Asia-Pacific cooperation as well as the global international framework will not collapse because of the US-China direct confrontation. Thank you.
Okay. If we don't have time, that's okay. Okay. My question is to Professor Nakanishi. Japan seems to be one of the few states still holding to the post-World War II international liberal order, you know, focusing on the UN-based system still, and economic cooperation and creating free trade areas, etc. But is there any discussion within Japan as to this policy choice and considering a worsening security situation in Asia, as well as increasing problems depending on the US for Japan for its security? Are there any debates within Japan about this policy direction?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very good and important question. I think that's one of the weaknesses of the current Japanese debate on foreign policy is the lack of the debate, like you mentioned. Basically, for Japan, the US-Japan alliance, as well as the international cooperation framework, both regional and global, are two coexisting things. So those two things go together in terms of Japanese foreign policy, and Japan hold on to that very comfortable coexistence. But at the same time, there appears to be no alternative to that foreign policy. So we can discuss what if the US-Japan alliance collapses, but no serious expert can have a good answer to that. There is, of course, a question: what happens to Japanese foreign policy if the UN and the WTO and other kind of organizations cease to exist or cease to function? And that's a very serious question, but I don't think the Japanese experts have come up with a good alternative answer to that. So I agree that your question, my answer is that there is a shortage of debate, and I think that's a serious problem for Japan. Thank you.
Dear guests, now we end the keynote speeches. We will have a coffee break of 15 minutes.
Hello again. Welcome back after the short break. Now we are going to our panel. In the panel, we will have some presentations that will be actually a continuation of the debate. The context for which was already set by our distinguished keynote speaker. Again, we will also try to have a kind of comparative perspective toward the global and regional transformations. We are going to start with Mr. Yoichi Kato. He will talk about Japan's perspective toward the global transformation, especially considering the role of the US foreign policy. I guess you are going to use the podium.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Yoichi Kato, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting conference. I was actually invited last year by Ambassador Miyajima, but I couldn't make it, and so I'm so happy that I can make it this time around. I was actually in Brussels a few days ago, and I was on my way back to Tokyo, but I decided to drop by here in Turkey. I've never been to Turkey before. This is my first time. I'm really excited to be here and have an exchange of views with you all. Thank you very much. And today I'm going to talk about the regional, how the regional order in the Indo-Pacific is shifting from Japan's point of view, especially in view of the intensifying strategic rivalry between the United States and China. And what I'm going to, since I have only 12 minutes, I'm going to go really quick. And what I would tell you is, I'll tell you at the outset what I'm going to say, but what I would call US-China rivalry strategic domino. That's what I'm going to talk about. And there are basically 4 steps. The first step is US-China is now in a process of deepening their strategic distrust, regardless of the argument by many policy practitioners and academics over the last few years that the situation is getting worse and both countries should do something about it, but actually it's getting worse. And second step, because of this deepening strategic distrust, there's a serious negative impact on the regional strategic order. And I'm gonna explain in detail. But one of the features that we are seeing emerging is a parallel order, US-led order and a China-led order. And the countries in the region, like Japan, that's the third step, are suffering from, because of this strategic distrust and the emergence of parallel regional and world order, we are suffering from what I call dilemma of dual dependency. I call it D3, dilemma of dual dependency. The regional countries like Japan and other ASEAN countries and Australia as well, we depend on China for trade and economics. And most of the countries in the region have China as a largest trading partner, and while we depend on United States for providing security. And so we are on a sort of, depending on these two major powers for the different sector of national policy, important national policy. That makes it really difficult for all the countries in the region to go about our important policy of national governance, and that's a big problem. And that dilemma is deepening because of this exacerbation of U.S.-China relationship. And finally, because of that kind of challenges that the regional states are facing, because of this current status of Japan, U.S.-China relationship, regional states are to some extent forced to search for alternative strategic choice. And it was discussed in the previous session. I'm going into detail on my own view. And perhaps, since I don't have a time to go through all those steps in detail, so I'll just focus on the first step, what's happening between United States and China. And I want to explain detail about the alternative strategic choice that Japan is facing. And I think it has some relevance to what Turkey is going to do, because Turkey is allied to the United States through NATO, I think, if you are still allied. Japan is, of course, allied to the United States through bilateral Japan-US security relationship, and China is emerging, I think, for Turkey also as a very important economic partner. So there's some relevance, and perhaps you can, from a Turkish point of view, my presentation may have some relevance. So about the U.S.-China relationship, why deepening strategic distrust? This is not a new phenomena. It was, pointed out in this joint study published from Brookings Institution back in 2012. It was a joint study between U.S. scholar and Chinese scholar. As you may know, on U.S. side was Ken Lieberthal, the well-known China expert, and on U.S. China side is Wang Zisi, Beijing Dasher, Beida, Peking University. And both of them worked on this issue of strategic distrust. What they meant by strategic distrust was the long-term intention, whether both countries can understand the other party's long-term intention. And what they are arguing is that they don't. China and the United States cannot really understand the other party's long-term strategic intentions. And even though they can go about the day-to-day diplomatic issues and solve the problems, but when it comes to long-term strategic intentions, they don't get it each other. And what I'm trying to say is it's still there. And actually, there are two cases I'm going to explain which shows that this exacerbation of strategic distrust is happening right now. One case is this dual management failure of U.S.-China relations. What I mean is both United States and China are making really serious mistake and admit that they made a mistake in formulating the bilateral diplomatic relationship, strategic relationship with the other. On the U.S. side, as you may be aware of, there is a emerging and widely shared argument that the engagement was mistake, and on China's side was the fact. They don't admit mistakes, so it's a fact that the new type of major power relation, that the China was trying to establish with the United States when Xi Jinping came to power back in 2013. Actually, it was a failure. China don't talk about it anymore, right? Because it failed. And so I'm going to just go very quickly how it happened. For U.S. side, this is a Pence speech. This is a famous speech that Pence made. There are two speeches as you may be aware of about what he talked about Chinese policy, but this is the most recent one. And he said, as I highlighted in red, no longer will America and its leaders hope that the economic engagement alone will transform Communist China, Communist China's authoritarian state into free and open society. And now the United States seeks a fundamental restructuring of a relationship with China. And this is not partisan position. As you may know, Kurt Campbell, who was Assistant Secretary during the Obama administration, he also wrote in a recent piece of Foreign Affairs that there is a growing consensus that the era of engagement with the United States, with China, has come to an unceremonious close. The debate is over what comes next. Basically, what they're saying is the United States has been trying to shape China into democracy through engagement. To put it much more simplistic way, if I would say we, because Japan takes the same approach. If we could make China rich, they'll become democratic, like us. But actually, the United States come to realize recently that that's not the case. China is rich, but China is not democratic, and there's no prospect that they'll become democratic. So what do we do? That's the question that they're saying. And the Pence is saying that in order to deal with it, the United States has to fundamentally restructure the relationship. So by adopting this engagement approach, they are giving some breaks to China, even if they don't really live up to the kind of expectation that the United States has, as long as the United States thinks that China is moving toward democracy. But now they say that's not the case anymore. So we don't give them any break, and make it really harsh and hard. And that's what's happening right now. And the U.S. failure, a Chinese failure is, as I said, this is a new type of major power relations. This was first launched by Xi Jinping when he visited the United States back in 2012, when he was still a vice president, running up to the process of becoming the president. And he launched this idea, to define the relationship with the United States. They think if they could manage the relationship with the United States, their foreign policy would be in a good shape. So this was a sort of a key concept that Xi Jinping tried to launch when he was about to go into the administration. But the problem was, I highlighted in red, respecting each other's core interests. That was one of the elements that was included in this concept, but this was something that United States could not live with, because core interests include Taiwan, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, all those things, and especially Taiwan. If they take this argument that they are going to, argument of respecting China's core interests, that means they are going to abandon Taiwan. And as you, some of you may know, United States has a legislation called TRA, Taiwan Relations Act, and with that they oblige themselves to help Taiwan to defend itself. So there's no way for them to go along with this idea. And so eventually United States rejected this idea, as I said. So it was failed. And it was a big embarrassment to Xi Jinping. So they, and of course China never admit their mistakes, so they never say that it was rejected, but they don't talk about it anymore, right? So so this shows that both China and the United States, as was pointed out in Brookings' study back in 2012, really don't get it, you know. It's so obvious, for example, that China would not become democratic because the decision was made right at the time of the Tiananmen Square incident. You know, the reason why Deng Xiaoping decided to run the tanks into the square and kill all those students was because there's no way in his idea for Communist Party to survive, allowing the process of democracy to take root. It was already obvious. And why did it take so long for United States to realize that this was the case, right? And also on China's side, it was, as I said, there's no way for United States, there's no way to expect United States to abandon Taiwan or Xinjiang. No way, you know, because if they did, you know, that would make United States un-American, you know. United States stands on the values, right, core values, and if they give up on these values, United States is not the United States anymore. There's no way. Then why didn't, you know, Chinese Communist Party notice it? Perhaps they wanted to try it and see how, you know, the United States would react, but it was a you know, non-starter to begin with. It was a big mistake to begin with at the very beginning. That means, so what I said, they don't get each other. That's the problem. And the other case, I said there are two cases. The other case is these regional strategy, free and open Indo-Pacific strategy or vision. Japanese government these days changed the designation of this initiative from strategy to vision. But anyway, and China's BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. You know, I don't want to go too much in detail because I don't have time, but basically what Japan is trying to do with this new vision is trying to connect between Asia and Africa, and by expanding the infrastructure development. That's the basic idea. And the U.S. for it a little bit different, but basically saying a little bit more harsher on China. And as it says, and they are, in U.S. view, this is the competition with tools for competition with China and trying to provide the region with alternative choice other than working with China's Ida-Idu, One Belt, One Road. But anyway, so now both United States, Japan, and China are looking at each other over this competition between FOIP and the BRI in a fairly critical way. I don't have time, so I skip it. For example, this one is Mike Pence again. China is using One Belt, One Road initiative to establish foothold in ports around the world, ostensibly such and such, okay? And by the way, Trump administration never say Belt and Road Initiative. They use the full name, One Belt, One Road. You know why? Because China changed the name of English name of this Ida-İTÜ from One Belt One Road, the literal translation to Belt and Road Initiative, because they realized they had to dodge the criticism from United States. United States criticized One Belt One Road because it's a one-way street. You know, the benefit goes only to China, and there's only one way, and there's no other way. You know, so China realized that they have to change the name. So they take out all those ones. So instead they shorten it and Belt and Road Initiative. But you know what? They don't change the Chinese name. It's still Ida-İTÜ. So it's just for outsiders. You know, it's a very superficial cosmetic change. But that's what China does all the time. But anyway, so Trump administration, check the documents. They always use the full name. It's an in-your-face, you know, criticism to China. They never use BRI. So I use One Belt One Road too. But anyway, so China at the beginning was rather wait and see position about FOIP. They didn't know what kind of position they should take. But these days, after Obama administration criticized One Belt One Road as a very negative, counterproductive initiatives for the rest of the region. Now China started saying it. This is last August, but said United States has tried to drive a wedge between regional countries by promoting so-called Indo-Pacific strategy. So now this FOIP versus OBOR, One Belt One Road, is another case of distrust. Right? So those are the two things. I don't have time. So what's the impact of this strategic distrust between China and the United States? This is my way of looking at the change of leadership structure in the region. It used to be uncontested U.S. primacy. The United States had a dominance on both economy and security in the region. But now it's contested fiercely by China. It's a contested U.S. primacy. Economic and trade, as I said, China has an upper hand in controlling these domains. And United States still has military power to control the security domain of this region. And that leads to, as I said, to the regional lesser strong states, including Japan, to suffer dilemma of geo-dependency, as I said. You know, same with ASEAN countries, Southeast Asia. And the question is, what's next? And there are four possible possibilities. One is continued contested U.S. primacy. And however contested it is by China, United States maintain primacy and maintain the unipolarity structure in the region. Actually, Japanese government takes this position. I don't think Ambassador Miyajima would ever say that openly, but that's the position. Japanese government never used the term multipolarity to describe the current status of the power structure in the region. But neither use this unipolarity, but this is what it is. Japanese government said that Japan-US alliance, a pillar of Japan's foreign policy. But this is what it means. Japan will help United States maintain its contested primacy. And second possibility is power share. You may have heard it, but this is the idea that Australian academic Hugh White launched in his paper. And it's similar to the idea Pacific Committee that Kissinger wrote in his book on China. And Xi Jinping, as you may recall, made a statement that Pacific is big enough for two major powers. He's basically talking about this power share idea. And this is a bipolarity. And the other thing is, as I said, the parallel world, US-led order and the China-led order. And it could be bipolarity or multipolarity without any evident leader. And finally, the fourth choice is China's primacy. Accept China's influence and hegemony. And Japan's choice is, as I said, is number one, as I said. And so, with this choice in mind, what is happening between United States and China right now? United States, as I said, realized that the engagement doesn't work. So now they are moving toward balancing or even decoupling. Balancing is, as it says, to balance out what China's increasing influence or aggressive, assertive approach. So trade war, what's happening is a good example of balancing. But now it's going further, more aggressive approach of decoupling. Decoupling is basically trying to have, as I said, parallel world with China. You don't really mix with China. You don't accept China's leadership. And for example, I don't go in too much in detail, but for example, decentralized supply chain is a good example in 5G. So you don't really work with China. You try to establish a totally separate order because national interests do not overlap and only collide. And China, how is China responding? There's two ways that China could actually respond. The other one, the one way is to go back to resurrect the rather lenient approach, modest approach that Deng Xiaoping created. Way, hide your capability, buy your time. Don't stand out, but try to coexist with major powers. That's the one way. And there's an argument actually that China should go back to this way. But the other one is Xi Jinping's idea, self-reliance. This is really aggressive way. This is, I would say, China's decoupling. China's decoupling way of running the diplomacy. And this is one of the argument that that China should go back to Taoyuan way. This is Yang Jiemin. He is head of the Shanghai Institute for International Studies, but he's as you know brother of Yang Jiechi, the director of Office of Foreign Affairs of the Communist Party. He's a top guy of the China's course. But anyway, he talks about modesty. That when China is big, you have to maintain modesty. But this was 2 years ago, and this year I attended the same conference, but he stopped talking about it already. So apparently he doesn't think it's politically viable anymore to talk about modesty foreign policy. So this is a matrix to analyze what is going to happen if China maintains this Zuli Ganshan aggressive China decoupling approach and the United States go down to decouple. That means mutual decoupling between China and the United States, and it will lead to parallel world. And some people say it's a new Cold War. And this is a Financial Times foreign editorial. Last December, it says that decoupling of the technology sectors between the two countries is becoming a reality. One that splits the internet between dominant US and Chinese spheres. So that is exactly what I said. Two parallel worlds. This kind of view is getting. And this is another interesting piece appeared last week. You might have seen it. It's written by Walter Russell Mead, and title is China is the real sick man of Asia. And it's interesting in the sense that it talks about weak China scenario. All the argument up until now is based on the premise and assumption China is big and will be bigger, and we have to deal with it some way. But now, with this coronavirus issue, some policy expert or journalists started to see that it revealed the weakness of China. And this coronavirus issue is not just a failure of public health management, but it shows the vulnerability of China's governance system itself, or even political system. Chinese Communist Party, one-party dominance, the weakness. And so we may have to also take this idea into consideration when we think of the competition with China, weak China scenario. And as most of the Chinese experts agree, weak China scenario will be a bigger headache for us than strong China scenario, because with weak China scenario, there's going to be enormous kinds and number of domestic-oriented issues come out, and we have to deal with it. That doesn't happen when China still maintain this strong China trajectory. So this is a really important issue that we have to take part. So I don't have time, and so with this I just stop. So what's the Japan's strategic options with these changes in the regional environment, and also U.S.-China alliance, U.S.-China relationship? Japan's default position is what I would call hugging America, stay with the United States. Okay, and as I said, with this approach, we support U.S. contested primacy. But with uncertain U.S. commitment and increasing assertive China, this may not be the only possible strategic option that Japan can stay with. So those are the three alternative options Japan has. One is interbalancing, to build up its own capabilities, mainly military and economy, to be independent of the United States. And second is external balancing, look for alternative alliance or other coalitions. And third and final is accept China, surrender to China. Those are the four options. And my argument, important thing is, this is not one or the other option argument. Those four options are not mutually exclusive. They exist simultaneously, even now. For example, Japan. Internal balancing, I put several things, but spy satellites is a very good example. When North Korea launched a Tepodo missile over Japanese archipelago back in 1998, Japan decided to launch our own satellites, spy satellites, to watch what's happening in North Korea, actually China too. But the United States fiercely opposed it. Don't waste your money. We have satellites and we provide you imagery, so you just analyze it and we share. Why do you need a satellite? Wasting money. But we did. Not that we don't trust Americans, but we want our own capabilities. Independent of the United States. So this is a good example. And external balancing. For example, TPP-11, it's an economic domain, but TPP-11 is an external balancing without the United States, even though that's not what Japan wanted to do. The United States just unilaterally withdrew. Japan had to take the lead. And also, EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement with EU, is also external balancing. And both of them are really successful. And finally, bandwagoning with China. 2 years ago, when Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited China, he entered into an agreement with his counterpart in China to work together on infrastructure export in third country. And this was, China publicized it, that this was the case that Japan finally decided to accept and join One Belt, One Road. And Japanese government said, no, that's not the case, but Japan didn't really deny openly. But instead, Japan's idea was by imposing several important conditions to work with China in export infrastructure, like transparency, openness, the financial health of the recipient country, we could rectify the negative attitude of China. Instead of decoupling China like the United States does, Japan still maintained this engagement approach to actually change China. And so that's totally different from the US approach. And it's happening. So as I said, all those four are not mutually exclusive. It's happening. And depending on how much we can depend on China, we'll just change the weight we put in each element and strike out the right mix. And that's our choice. And that's the answer that the lady asked in the previous session. This is an alternative choice of Japan. It's happening. And this applies to other regional countries as well, which suffer just as the dilemma of dual dependency like Japan does. With that, I stop. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this stimulating presentation, which really complemented Professor Nakanishi's overall framework. Now we move to Meliha from Middle East Technical University. She's going to also expand on Fuat Hoca''s argument to talk more about the Middle Eastern dimension to Turkish foreign policy.
Thank you very much. I would like to also thank you for the invitation. For this very interesting, already very interesting conference. I will focus on the Middle East and Turkey's foreign policy in it, and in that sense, really, my perspective complements very much Fuat Hoca''s general framework, because I also think that we are going to triple transitions, as the name of the conference indicates. There's a global transition. I'm not going to talk about that. It has already been discussed. There's a regional transition in the Middle East, and also I think domestic transitions in the Middle East, and including Turkey. And I think that these what I call triple transitions are mutually reinforcing each other and affecting each other. So it's not necessarily, from my perspective, coming always from the global to regional and domestic, but sometimes domestic transitions also trigger changes in the regional and the global. In fact, if you look at it, look at the situation we are in now through this idea of transitions, global, regional, and domestic. Of course, transitionary periods are very much unstable, and you see that instability throughout. I will first start talking generally about the Middle East regional order before the Arab uprisings, because I really think that Arab uprisings was a watershed in starting these transitions. Although we have this discussion about to what extent there's continuity and change. Obviously, there are continuities, important continuities, especially since 2003, yet another very important turning point in Middle East regional politics, that is the US invasion of Iraq. That unleashed many processes already. But I think the Arab uprisings took this to a new level, and in terms of this mutually reinforcing triple transitions. It is important to understand, some of the general characteristics of the region already. We have been referring to sort of post-World War II global international order, which was largely liberal. The Middle East regional order was never a liberal regional order to start with. This region has been highly militarized when you look at it. Of course, there were instances where there was more militarization, but overall you see this as a very highly militarized region. It has suffered from several regional conflicts, long-lasting regional conflicts. It has been very open to interventions of the global powers of the day, whoever they are. As we call it, this is a very highly penetrated region that global powers have played a very important role. And more importantly, now that we were talking about Asia, where we see some regionalization and regionalism, this is a region that lacks to a large extent regionalism, and especially dispute settlement mechanisms, dialogues, and we see this the detrimental effects of this today. The region is beset by several conflicts, but unfortunately there are no mechanisms that exist to mitigate these conflicts and problems. So This is the characteristic of the regional order, and to that we have the Arab uprisings and the developments after that, and that sort of made the situation even worse for the region, because now we have the problem of what Thomas Diaz called areas of limited sovereignty, which means that in Yemen, Syria, in Libya, this is a new phenomenon we didn't have in the Middle East before. We had conflicts, but we didn't have these collapsed state structures and areas of limited sovereignty. This has become an important element of the regional order now. And there is also proliferation of non-state actors, and we have also regional powers with the Arab uprisings, saw opportunities and challenges in the transformations. I mean, they wanted to use these opportunities to enhance their power and influence in the region, but at the same time they felt threatened because of the Arab uprisings, and they responded to that threat in their policies. Adding to that, you have also the problem of changing U.S. Engagement with the region. I mean, there's a huge debate about this, whether the U.S. is withdrawing or not. I don't see it as a withdrawal, but it is just redefining its engagement with the region. And this did not start with Trump, as as I already mentioned, for the general global order. This started actually for the Middle East after 2003 and hastened with Obama, and then it continues with the Trump administration. So clearly the US is not eager to play the roles that it used to play in the Middle East regional order since the end of the Cold War, World War II, and it is redefining its relationship because it doesn't feel imminent threats to its security, and it does not also see its interests, particularly as regards to oil, as important as it used to be. And this is also related, I think, to its relations with its allies, because after the end of the World War II, one of the reasons for US engagement in the Middle East and its security was to protect the interests of its allies, Western Europe and Japan. That's no longer an important, I mean, when you think of changing global order, it's no longer an important US interest. So basically, so the US involvement in the Middle East peaked during W. Bush administration, and then since then it is in decline. This has become an important element of regional order. And with that, of course, there are different consequences of this, shifting and transiting regional order. One of the consequences is that, as I said, regional powers are trying to deal with the opportunities and the challenges and competing with each other, and these areas of limited sovereignty have become arenas for these regional powers to compete with each other and to enhance their power. So you see this in Syria, you see this in Libya and Yemen and Iraq. Therefore the global shift allowed regional powers more leeway in their regional activism. And at the same time, this global shift also allowed other great powers like Russia in particular, but to some extent China, to become more active in the Middle East. And Russia's activism is not only limited to Syria. Of course, we talk about this in the Syrian context mostly, but Russia is everywhere in the Middle East. I mean, they are dealing with everybody. They have close relations with Israel. They have developed relations with the Gulf Arab monarchies, and they have developed quite close relations with Egypt. They are there in Libya. So, I mean, Russia is not just a power that is interested in Syria, but it has an overall Middle East engagement which is increasing. And this is one of the reasons, the US's re-engagement is one of the reasons for that. The regional countries, when you look at the regional relations, what you see is that in addition to the axis that emerged, especially after 2003, that is the axis and the competition between Iran and its allies on the one hand and Saudi Arabia and its allies on the other, that axis is still there, although its importance has declined to some extent when you consider Saudis and the Emiratis trying to talk to Iranians and having all these talks, secret talks among themselves. Nevertheless, it's still there, but at the same time, a new axis emerged where Turkey became a party. And this has been one of the important shifts since the Arab uprisings. There's Turkey and Qatar on the one hand, and Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates on the other. You started to see, after the Arab uprisings, this new axis emerging. We used to say that Iranian-Saudi competition was one of the most detrimental things that happened in the region after 2003, and after the Arab uprisings, Turkey and Saudi Emirati axis started to even replace it, because wherever you look at it, you see these sides. I mean, you see them to some extent in Syria, you see them in Iraq, you see them in Yemen to some extent, but more importantly, Libya and even countries like Tunisia. I mean, Tunisia is divided, domestic debate divided into two, and the two sides are supported by different parties. So this is really very detrimental for regional security, this increasing rifts between these axes. But at the same time, you also have what Fuat just said, flexible alliances, a study called these liquid alliances. You mentioned Bowman, and this is an idea of flexible modernity, as you know, his idea, and they drew from him and talked about these flexible alliances, which means that issue-specific alliances you see very fluid. I call this, we can call this compartmentalization also, and you see this between Turkey and Russia. They're not really allies, but they, cooperate in some aspects, and they can act together. You see this even Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. I mean, as I said, they constitute an axis. But when you look at Yemen, the recent developments in Yemen, you see that they also compete. So you see these liquid alliances all over the Middle East. So all this, of course, tells us clearly that there is more insecurity, mistrust, zero-sum mentality, and instability in this region, right? I mean, the picture that I'm basically drawing tell us that. It also tells us that some of these issues are structural, that there is structural affinity to conflict, affinity to zero-sum mentality, and this is this is one of the problems. And you see this in the domestic realm as well. I will come to Turkey specifically, but all over the region you see, despite this hope after the Arab uprisings, you see personalization, even more personalization of foreign policy making. You see emphasis on nationalism, military power, more zero-sum mentality, and also attempts to externalize conflicts, to deal with domestic issues. Regimes everywhere in the Middle East are externalizing conflicts And they are, you see, increasing political intrusions in the domestic affairs of neighboring states. It's all over. So all this adds to what I call structural tendency to conflict. So the global changes, regional changes, and the domestic, and they are mutually reinforcing themselves. And all this is also enhancing the possibility of unintended conflict. I mean, the states may not necessarily want to have direct conflict, but these kinds of policies and with the structural tendency to conflict in the region, you can end up in a war. And I think what happened in Idlib recently is an example of that. I mean, Turkey engaged in brinkmanship, basically taking it to the last stage, not necessarily to have this war, but the situation is such that if you employ this brinkmanship, the war could be possible. That's the situation in the region, which is very scary, I would say. So I see Turkey's foreign policy within this general structural context, global and regional, and also domestic. Of course, when you look at Turkey's foreign policy in the Middle East, there has been important shifts in Turkey's foreign policy. In the early 2000s, for instance, Turkey saw more opportunities than threats coming from the region. It was employing soft power, emphasizing economic interdependence. It was playing these third-party roles, mediation roles. Basically, it was placing itself above the regional polarization and conflicts. I mean, that was Turkey's policy, right? The idea that I can talk to everybody and with this side, with the other side, it's just trying to, mediate different conflicts. But after the Arab uprisings, this totally changed. Turkey now sees more threats than opportunities in this region, use military means. I mean, this is the fourth operation in Syria, military operation, as you know. Turkey became, as I said, part of regional polarization, as I already mentioned, both ideationally and materially. This is an important change. I explain part of this change due to global and regional structural changes, part of it domestically. I think, again, this reinforces all these trends. Domestically, when you look at the governing party, there has been a change in its perspective and alliances. Its alliance with the MHP and emphasis on nationalism. And this is largely due to the perception of increasing challenges to the AKP role. And the AKP, starting from Gezi Park protests, I mean, this was very telling that President Erdogan started his first speech after the killing of our soldiers in Idlib with Gezi. I mean, there is this narrative that since Gezi and then, the coup attempt, even before, the deterioration of relations with the Gülen movement, and also truce with the PKK fell, there was the economic crisis. I mean, all that, the narrative is that all that is an attempt to topple the government in Turkey. That's what the government perceives it. And so therefore, its perception of not only domestic politics and foreign policy is very much colored with this idea. And in addition to that, I mean, if you read some of the writings of people close to the government, you see increasing mistrust to the West, and this is very much colored by the policies of the United States and EU in response to the coup attempt in Turkey. They didn't respond to it immediately, and they were a bit ambiguous in their response to it, and that affected, colored the government's perception of the West and its alliance with the West, and you started to see all these analysis coming from people close to the government that this is a new world now, which is, you know, true. The liberal order is in decline, and, you know, multipolarity seems to be emerging. So in this new world, Turkey cannot just, you know, in a way, strangle itself with the Western cloth. I mean, it has to be flexible. It has to, you know, have its own perspective on things. It can ally with itself. With Russia, it can buy S-400s, and, you know, I mean, this, I think, perspective that is prevalent now in the government is also influencing Turkey's engagement with the Middle East. So, as I say, these three levels, you know, the global transitions, regional transitions, and the domestic transitions in Turkey and elsewhere are mutually reinforcing the situation that we are in, which is unfortunately highly unstable and insecure for all. I have to say, I mean, I would have liked to end in a positive note. Generally, I am a very optimistic person. I try to be. But unfortunately, it seems that this will continue to some extent, at least in the medium term, because you know, it's hard to see something coming out from the global system, you know, that would bring some order and stability to the region. Russia has its own perspective, but I don't think that perspective is going to bring stability and peace to the region. US is not interested, EU cannot do it, and unfortunately there are not interesting ideas coming out of the region as well. I mean, you need mediators, you need parties that are, you know, to some extent impartial and trying to bring together, you know, these countries, and you don't have those. I mean, Turkey for a long time played this role, but now Turkey is not in that position also, because it's seen as party to the polarization in the region. So therefore, I mean, I think we have to live with an unstable Middle East at least in the short and medium term. And I will stop there. Thank you.
I'll take the vote. Is Nihat Ali Özcan. He's also gonna delve deeper into the Middle Eastern vortex of instability, especially highlighting the role of the non-state actors. I guess he's gonna use our own presentation as well.
Thank you very much. The Meliha also mentioned the general picture in the Middle East. My presentation is based on a technical issue. Because this system, the global competition, regional competition, and also domestic competition and transformation created the new or strengthened the new actor as a non-state actor. The non-state actors needs the weapon for playing the role. I want to show some picture in your mind, and then I might be in the topic. 19th and 20th century generally mention about the insurgents, revolutionary or other groups. There was some symbol as a dynamite, 19th century. The 20th century was the AK-47, the Kalashnikov. But today, the picture completely changed. Why? Because the Middle East and weaponization of non-state actors created new opportunity space for this kind of actor. For example, there's a good picture. I enjoyed this picture because the picture is a show to us the weaponization of non-state actor. On the wall, you can see different products from the different countries. For example, old Soviet Union, China, Bulgaria, Romania, and also United States. Maybe some arms produced under the Pakistan. And also you can see this guy used the cell phone, but it's a very important issue for us. Especially this technology created the new opportunity space as a smartphone for the non-state actors. They gained the capability for the clash or for the war. And the other picture, you can see this is a handmade sniper. I think this guy, any organization, any industrial fabric they made, not the industrial product. The other issue, as you see, is a very sophisticated mappa using against the helicopter or the other air vehicle. It's very important because this kind of item can change the nature of the war or change of the conflict. Also, you can see some very creative approach. As you know, the container of the LG container transformed as a artillery. And also, you can see this is a very expensive item, anti-tank missile, very, very expensive. But you can see a lot of, in the Middle East, under the control of each different type of organization. And this is a smuggling. You can find a lot of this kind of item. And also the drone has been changing character of the war in the region. Not only among the state, but also the strength, the position of the non-state actor. This is very interesting. Turkey is a mid-sized country, and Turkey has the 300-kilometer range missile, but on the other hand, in the Yemen, Houthi has a 1,700-kilometer range missile. It's very interesting. Okay. I want to say that the Meliha Hoca mentioned the general picture in the Middle East. It means that at the end of the day, the main actor became, or important actor became the non-state actor. The second issue, the making the policy, the tool and understanding has been changed. In this case, I saw that there is a several type of there are several type of conflict in the region. One is the intra-Sunni among the Sunni Shia, the sectarian conflict, ethnic conflict. On the other hand, there is some state-to-state conflict, but also the character of the conflicts are completely different each other. Some is model of the insurgency, some is also as a bandit. There is a competition among the all non-state actors. It means that at the end of the day, in the Middle East, there are several failed, fragile, or collapsed states. It means that there is no central control in any territorial area or country's border. They're very weak. The geography is very important because some countries can reach the sea road for this kind of activity. At the end of the day, this kind of non-state actor provide or reach the arm or weapons using a different method. One is black market. The black market, as you know, the smuggling is working very hard because if you have in the war, you need the ammunition and arm. In the region, there is a very professional smugglers. If you have money, you can find this kind of arms or missile or manpad very easily. Because the civil war and weak and poor country or collapsed country created the opportunity space for the smugglers. And also On the other hand, if there is no the state control, it means that the non-state actor produces the product as a drug, the money, and then can buy very easily this kind of item. The second issue is a gray market. Gray market, not green, not black market or white market. The gray market is that the half of the role belongs to states. The generally states feeding and providing to the very sophisticated arm in the region, because today's the intelligence person very active than army and the diplomat in the Middle East, because the states generally, some states, they don't occupy the responsibility for during the clash time period. For example, some country openly or covertly provide this kind of item to the war zone and then created and encourage and support the non-state actor. There was some very interesting interview. Germany openly provided the anti-missile tank missile to the northern Iraq Peshmerga groups. This guy selling this missile to the market, black market. And then the black market, the Daesh reached this item. When after the operation, the PKK reached this item. It means that this system feeding each other as a very, very wider area. This, on the other hand, the proxy war is a very common in the region. It means that all states openly support and provide the ammunition and right. The other issue, as you know, when state fail or fragile, insurgency, terrorist or criminal groups, they looting and steal from the military arsenal, this kind of items, and then they bring to the market and deliver off to the other groups. The fourth method is the corrupt military and the police force or civil servant. They provide, they behave as a provider during the civil war, insurgency and other positions. They deliver this kind of item. Last one is very interesting. I show to you. The open technology innovation provide the good opportunity space to the insurgency, uprising or other groups, especially smartphone, for example. The smartphone using the military aim or military activity, defining your target and calculation your position, and the weaponization of the internet or the social media, and also to provide the communication, and also using the very easily defined the target. Also, the other issue is that, for example, the drone. The drone issue is a civilian or any ordinary drone can make it some change and bring the military drone. Is that all of them in the Middle East, we can see that at the moment there are very huge number armed and weapon and ammunition in the region. It means that the main providers, the states, it depends on the regional competition. They bring this item, and the prevent the spread arms and responsibilities belong to states, but they don't interest. But long term, this arms and capability, not only arms and capability, but also how know-how, they bring to the security problem, not on the region, but also all the Europe or other countries. This kind of items also encourage and support the non-state actors, and also expanding their life It means that long term in the Middle East, we can see, unfortunately, we can see similar story and then feeding each other. Thank you.
Kıvanç Ulusoy will be wrapping up discussions. Thank you very much. Of course, this will not be the restatement of all these presentations underlined in these presentations. Just few theoretical conclusions I think I can make, and this will be enough. This will also bring you some further questions, and we might have them in the concluding discussion. First of all, we see the structural significance of American foreign policy, meaning that the changes in American foreign policy, or the changes in the foreign policy of American administrations, has structural significance. This is different from studying other foreign policies. So this affects, and we see that the changes in the American foreign policy that came or that appeared with the Trump administration can be pulled somehow backwards. And it did not start with Trump administration. It goes probably before that up to Clinton administration, when it was boldly stated in those times that the America is not interested in financing or sustaining the post-war international consensus on liberal democratic economic and political system. And this started to change, of course, recently, and this was boldly stated by various times by the Trump administration, by Trump himself, that America, the United States, is no longer interested in sustaining this post-war consensus. This has effects, of course. This has effects in terms of institutional structure of the post-war international system, and also it has effects on the foreign policy of American allies and the adversaries. And we are seeing this in both the Turkish case and the Japanese case. And this pull, this pulling off from sustaining the international order, post-war international orders, has detrimental effects in the case of Japan. We see that because Japan is interested in sustaining this liberal international order, because as a country it benefits from that, and I think there is also a serious discrepancy, although not boldly stated or debated in the case of Japan, that Japan is not very happy with the change of American foreign policy. It has effects on Turkish foreign policy, because Turkey relied heavily on American foreign policy structure and believed in the security support that the United States provides for Turkey, and it has been disappointed in various cases from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Middle East, and also to in some cases to the Black Sea and the Caucasus region too. However, the changes in foreign policy, of course, has not only does not only have, let's say, international systematic context, but also it has domestic context. We have seen this in the case of both Japan and Turkey too. In the case of Turkey, it is widely debated, and also it has been the case still probably for the current Turkish government that this post-war consensus that was established in Turkey's domestic politics that ties Turkey to the Western security structure has been shaken. And this is due to the changes in Turkey's domestic politics. Somehow this was applauded or celebrated as deepening democratization in Turkey, which brought alternative elites, which also questions Turkey's, Turkey's consensual approach or consensual perspective to Western security structures. But we have been seeing that the growing pluralization in Turkey's politics and changes in governing elite in terms of personnel, in terms of not just in terms of perspective and ideology, but in terms of personnel, gives or provides or paves way for Turkey to search for other or alternative routes to Western road, let's say. In the case of Japan, we see that still there has been a lack of debate whether Japan should in what ways Japan should respond to general international changes, or whether Japan can have an alternative road that was established in foreign policy in the post-war era. This is, in brief, or alternatively stated, in the case of Japan, we see that still there is this post-war consensus on foreign policy is maintained. In the case of Turkey, this is radically questioned, and we have been seeing the alternatives to that. And this is the first section of the theoretical conclusion. The second section is related with the alliances. It has been common nowadays in international relations to speak again about the alliances, but we have been seeing that this time again we see some kind of transformation in the nature of alliances. The alliances before the Cold War, or the alliances leading to two world wars, were alliances based on the balance of power structure in international relations, directed towards a certain target or a certain country. Meaning that, for instance, Germany allies with Russia against Britain, or France allies with Russia against Germany. And we have seen in the post-Cold War, or in the Cold War era, that the alliances turned to be more structured kind of thing. Those alliances had somehow not just ad hoc or spontaneous alliances, but more of an institutional kind, which includes not just military alliances, let's say, alliances or military alignments, but including social and cultural and institutional features, including universities. We know very well that most of our university scholars have been in the United States or for this or that purposes, and those structures have, of course, long-term effects still, and maintains that alliance structure. And also there has been a cultural dimension of that alliance. So this was not an alliance, but in true terms, these alliances included a kind of hegemony, cultural and political and institutional dimension. Now we are seeing new forms of alliances in the post-World War era, again, of course, structured by or conditioned by the international system, changing the international system. But this time the alliances are not directed towards a certain target. And this is a serious thing. And these are fluid, these are flexible, yes, but these these alliances are slightly different from the previous two kinds of alliances, which does not have those structural features or those features of target and balance of power. And the last question, the last section is related with the non-state actors. Professor Nihat Özcan mentioned rightly that the alliances are the alliances of the state world, the world of states. An alliance is related with the state-centric logic of international relations. But we have seen in this latest presentation that there are other actors which are non-state actors, and they can sabotage the alliances. They can also play in the field as balancing actors, and also they radically change the nature of international relations, as they have manpower, technological power, and gunpower. Thank you very much.
So if there are any questions from the audience, which is the case, very quickly, short and directed questions, please.
Hello, my name is Yunus Duman. I'm a student in International Relations and Politics. Thank you for your presentations and analysis. My question is to Mr. Kato. Now, in your presentation, you mentioned that there's a weak China scenario due to coronavirus. Now, according to Kyoto News report, some of the operators of cruises have been bankrupt, and schools are beginning to shut down due to outbreak. My question is that, do you have with respect weak Japan scenario, a strategy against this outbreak? Thank you.
First of all, I would like to thank all our guests for joining us today and for their informative speeches. My question is also for Mr. Kato. In your presentation, you mentioned that the power share can be the next situation for the Indo-Pacific region. And my question is, if power share becomes the new realm of Indo-Pacific region, how would it affect the foreign policies of major powers regarding the region? And what would be the stance of ASEAN towards the power share? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Esra, and many thanks to our professors and TOBB University to this informative and stimulating conferences. And I also wanted to ask my question to Mr. Kato, and as he mentioned from his lecture about the new tech war, how Japan positioned itself within the new tech war, the new Cold War, and emerged from the AI, artificial intelligence, 5G, or the Huawei case. And thank you.
It's an honor to be here with all of you guests. It's really exciting. In fact, my question will also be for Mr. Kato. I will ask about your Japan Strategic Alternatives speech. You mentioned that there are 4 ones and they happen at the same time, but I want to draw a comparison between South Korea's President Moon Jae-in and how Koreans are more reconciliatory and more friendly towards other Asian nations, including North Korea and China. So, do you think it is possible, or is there a political ground for Japan to be not view China as an adversary, but as as an Asian brother nation, and maybe create some sort of an Asian unity from that respect, not just as an adversary? Thank you.
I would like to also thank all of you for enhancing our understanding of these complex issues. I'm a graduate student in Asian Studies, so my question was to Mr. Kato. So you have established that Japan...
We believe you here and we will go.
It is established that Japan has rising regional security concerns, and another aspect of this internal balancing that you have mentioned is the motivation of the Abe administration to reinterpret or revise the Article 9 of the Constitution. And I hope you could give us some insights into the public opinion on this issue, and as well as your scholarly opinion. And then a related question, could pacifism be considered a part of modern Japanese identity? Thank you.
Thank you, first of all. I would like to ask a question to Nihat Hoca.
Introduce yourself as well.
Yes, of course. My name is Burak. I came from Kırşehir Hayvan University. I would like to ask a question to Nihat Hoca. Hocam, as you know, states are arming non-state groups in other states, and this would somehow trigger state responsibilities under international law. What would we say about state responsibilities? Thank you.
There is a debate in the United States about Trump, but more generally U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. One actually, as I mentioned, the U.S. is pulling out, creating some strategic gaps, no longer really interested in the Middle East. But some analysts and scholars, and I agree with them in a way, so I took my position too, there is also a coherence that actually continues with actually all this administration, and maybe becomes very clear with Trump administration, or what goes on behind the Trump administration. That is, in addition to these flexible alliances, there is a coherent axis for U.S. view of Middle East occurring, very clearly right now, maybe than before. That is actually an axis based on security and energy, starting with Saudi Arabia, Emirates, going to Israel and Egypt, and seeing two main targets, not the rivals. One actually is, political Islam, including Muslim Brotherhood. Another actually is containing Iran. And as a matter of fact, these two are also related to weakening the leverage of Russia, in the Middle East. What do you think about this idea of coherence that the U.S. actually has, which is becoming more clear?
Thank you very much for your interest in my humble presentation. I'll go just one by one, quick. Weak Japan scenario? Of course, Japan is weak. Japan has a really fast aging population. Demographic changes present enormous vulnerability in terms of economic management. And another, I think, the really serious weakness of Japan, which has been revealed in this ongoing coronavirus incident, is Japan's dependence on the other countries, especially China, in terms of supply chain. What we have seen in this coronavirus incident is that economic interdependence could be a vulnerability. Up until now, general view was that globalization is good, and interdependence is a tool to realize globalization, right? And of course, when Trump was elected in the United States 2018, this notion has been questioned because the dark side of globalization played an enormous important role in making it possible for President Trump to be elected. So now we are seeing how to deal with the dark side of globalization. But now, and of course, in that context, the downside of economic interdependence was already discussed. But this ongoing coronavirus incident highlighted in a really clear way the economic interdependence could be vulnerability. And so Japan has enormous dependence on this kind of supply chain. And so that's another reason that Japan's weak scenario is irrelevant. Second, power share. How would ASEAN country would react? Well, ASEAN countries do not have a choice to make because they are not strong enough to dictate how China and the United States would make a decision. So only what they can do is, of course it's not that simple, but basically respond to what China and the United States would decide to do. And as I have explained in my slides to explain the strategic choice, what it means is weaker state have to prioritize strategic flexibility over strategic clarity. So those states, I think I can also include Japan in that category, but has to find a way to survive, even if it's not a really clear strategy. And that's what they are going to do, and that's what they are already doing. But if I might add, the shot of realism to this power share scenario, I don't think the United States would ever accept it. So I think there is a very few actually chance for this power share scenario to be actually realized. And next, AI and 5G. Those are the two different things. In terms of AI, actually I made a presentation in Beijing about a month ago. I was invited to Xianxiang Forum, which PLA organizes, and I was invited to an AI panel in the conference, and they asked me, PLA asked me, People in Liberation Army asked me to make a presentation on how Japanese self-defense forces uses AI in enhancing their capabilities. And my answer was, of course, I have no intention of leaking any secret to PLA. No, but the reality is, Japan tried to use and developed a way to use AI in defense purpose, but only to, for example, to deal with the shortage of the manpower shortage. As I said at the outset, Japan is facing enormous challenge of demographic change. And so, for example, to try to drive a destroyer with fewer number of the crews, for example. That's what Japanese self-defense force is doing to implement, take advantage of AI, but not the way like China or Russia do to come up with the autonomous lethal weapon. The lethal weapon which can just go on its own and kill people. Japan doesn't do that. So that's AI. Okay, that's distinct difference from what China and Russia are doing, and also the United States. And 5G. In terms of 5G, Japan takes lockstep with the United States. Japan does not say it clearly, but actually Japan will not allow Huawei to come into Japanese 5G wireless network, because it's not just a 5G it's not just a next generation cell phone system. No, it has things to do with how to control the flow of the information, big data. The data of all the Japanese nationals, populations about their income, or the medical data, or work history. Everything can be owned by the security information vendor which controls the system. So it's a matter of national security, and we cannot let China take care of this information. So Japan will never allow Huawei to come into this market, just as United States or Australia made a decision. So those two are totally different. So in terms of 5G, Japan also decouples China. And so decoupling is sectorial. Japan will never try to do overall decouple with China. No, we'll never do that. But like this kind of sectorial domain, which really touches upon the core of the national security of Japan, Japan does that. That's what it is. And why don't we just create a unity with China? Well, it depends on, it takes two to tango, right? So even if Japan tries to do it, if China doesn't want to do it, it's not going to work. And even as Japan and China, of course, both countries are suffering from coronavirus, China is sending more and more ships to Japan's territory in East China Sea, Senkaku Island. They don't stop sending those ships to claim their territorial sovereignty. Of course, you know, Japan claims the sovereignty and China claims sovereignty. You know, it's a fair game. But Japan, you know, it has things to do with this, pacifism. But if you see how Japan deals with territorial dispute with Korea or even Russia, Japan will never use its forces to make our claim. For example, Korea, you know, occupied the Takeshima, and they made it into a fortress. They stationed a military unit, but Japan never touches it. You know, we of course keep on claiming the sovereignty of the island, but they will never take any physical countermeasure. And same thing with the Northern Territory. Of course, all four islands are ours, and we keep on claiming it. But we'll never, you know, for example, send the self-defense forces to occupy it and make it, you know, our territory by force, like China did in South China Sea. So Japan takes a really lenient approach in terms of solving those international issues. So I think you can understand it is up to China whether we can create a unity. And public opinion, what was it? Internal balancing.
Article 9.
Article 9. Oh. Okay. It depends on the definition of pacifism. What you mean? If you mean pacifism by the risk-averse mentality, that Japan will never take risks in safeguarding our national interest or protecting the international order, like liberal international order, which Japan believes important for Japan and also for the entire region. It's changing. Japan is getting ready to take more risks, and when we try to play a larger role in that regard, Japan is changing. But as I said about Japan's approach to territorial disputes, if what you mean by pacifism, if it means that use of force to solve the international conflict, it hasn't changed at all. Japan never used force in solving the international conflict, and I don't think Japan will. So in that sense, depending on the definition, the pacifism, whether Japan is changing its pacifist position or not. Thank you.
As you know, there are several agreements among the states for the control of the armed trade, but some countries doesn't respect these rules. There are several reasons. On the other hand, as you know, for example, the last 2003, when United States against Operation Saddam Hussein, and as you know, Saddam's army purged completely. 3 million AK-47 fall to the civilian hand. It means that there you can find a lot of arms. The other issue, in the Middle East, there are several failed and fragile states. As you know, there is no control. These states, the capacity doesn't work in this region, and the war theater is a very wider. You cannot follow this kind of advanced technological arm. The other issue, I said, the gray market. A lot of country and state directly, indirectly support non-state actor and deliver the advanced technological arms, but as a rule, intelligence rule, deny. I don't know what will happen, what it do. Thank you.
Okay, I will try to be brief. Shortly, I don't agree with any of these positions. I mean, I don't think that U.S. is withdrawing. I know the debate. I don't think that U.S. is withdrawing because U.S. military presence in the Gulf is highest, and you know, it is not withdrawing. But I don't think that there is a coherent policy either. I mean, on the contrary, this several things are happening. I mean, it's not clear what U.S. policy in Syria is. You hear you know, from the same administration that they're withdrawing, and then, you know, they're not withdrawing, and they're here. What is the U.S. policy on Libya? I don't know. I mean, you hear voices, U.S. is supporting Farage, and then, you know, because of their relations with Saudi Arabia and UAE, they're supporting, you know, Haftar. And Eastern Mediterranean is very important for them, but you don't really see, you know, clear policy. Yes, on Iran, this administration has been consistent, but even if you look at it on a, you know, as a state's foreign policy, the previous administration is signing the deal, and this administration is just, you know, getting out of the deal. So this is not really coherence if you think in terms of state foreign policy. All this is creating uneasiness also among the allies, that to what extent they can depend on the US. That is creating these opportunities for the regional actors. And also about US's policy on Russia. I mean, that's also a bit unclear. On the one hand, you feel that US is not very happy that Russia is expanding everywhere, but on the other hand, you don't see the US doing much to really limit Russia. So, and what has really changed is that for better or worse, you know, previously, before Obama, all administrations had sort of a vision of the Middle East. They had a certain vision. And they have not, you know, been totally successful in implementing their vision, but at least they had a vision. I mean, now you don't see a vision, and that's quite problematic for regional actors. I think in addition to that, there are problems in terms of the administration itself, how monolithic its views on different issues. I mean, you always had some level of course, with every state. You know, you may have an internal debate, but with the United States now, this is being, this happening in the open, you know, and you're having like different policies, and there are domestic factors heavily, like other states also. So all that is changing, I think, how the U.S. is being viewed in the region. I mean, with Obama too, and now with Trump, maybe different actors. With Obama, it was Saudis and Emiratis who were not, you know, sure about U.S.'s policy. Now other actors are not sure about U.S.'s policy. So that previous, you know, engagement, which was based on a vision. And not only in terms of conflicts, but in terms of what kind of like the Arab-Israeli peace process, big projects, like dual containment even. I mean, these were big, regional vision projects. They don't exist anymore.
Thank you, Meliha. So with that Q&A session, we come to the end of our symposium today. I hope scholars coming from Japan found that this trip was worth it, and you have been also having other conversations, you'll be having more. And it seems there are indeed overlapping issues, understanding where the international order goes and what kind of regional implications they do have, also the domestic angle highlighted by Meliha. So this also proves the value of such an exchange between the two sides, and again, let me thank Mr. Ambassador for the support. And as a matter of fact, we were supposed to have a third speaker who couldn't make it because of a last minute emergency. So if it happens in April or May, we may be organizing a small event as well, focusing particularly on Japan's English policy with an angle toward the energy issues. So about that, we will be in touch with you. Thanks again for taking the time to attend today's event. And with that final note, I conclude the event altogether. Merci.